You made your mark. Now let the next generation take it from here.
That was Chase's parting gift. One sentence to close 3 decades. I gave 32 years to Ravenwell, and now my office is a storage closet next to the printer. I used to have the corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning sun just right. The one where people knocked before entering, even when the door was open. Now I sit beside a humming Xerox machine in a room that used to store toner and unopened boxes of cheap paper. They didn't even take the storage B label off the door. Ravenwell Group had changed, or maybe I had. In the 3 decades I gave to this company, I survived 4 CEOs, 2 near bankruptcies, and a hostile takeover attempt that almost gutted our M&A division. But I never expected to be erased like this. Not with a bang, not even a whimper, just quietly moved to the side. Every morning like clockwork. I arrived at 7:45. The building's coffee cart guy, Marco, always greeted me with a respectful nod. "Morning, Ms. Torrance," he said today, handing me my usual black no-sugar double strong. I thanked him and headed into the lobby. The front desk had new faces, young ones. They didn't look up from their screens as I walked by. I wasn't on the executive roster anymore. My nameplate had been replaced with that of Chase Rivington, the new CEO. Chase was 35, charismatic, brilliant even, and arrogant in the way that only men with Ivy League MBAs and 0 life scars could be. He swept into Ravenwell 6 months ago with promises of agile reinvention and leaner thinking. I was neither agile nor lean in his eyes. I was legacy code. Still I showed up. Not because I thought they'd bring me back into the boardroom, but because Ravenwell was in my bones. It was the place where I found my voice, built my reputation, and fought for deals that saved hundreds of jobs. It was mine, even if the furniture had changed. I pressed the elevator button, cradling my coffee in both hands like a talisman. The mirrored doors opened to reveal Chase, flanked by his assistant Callie, and 2 junior analysts I didn't recognize. He nodded at me. Elaine Chase. We stood in silence as the elevator ascended. The analysts pretended to check their phones. Callie glanced between us, offering a tight-lipped smile. She seemed nervous new, still learning how to survive in the jungle of C-suite egos. As we reached the 24th floor, Chase turned to me and said casually, "You know, Elaine, you've earned your time. No need to babysit the future." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He smiled all teeth and charm. "Just saying, we're in good hands. You don't need to stress over the M&A meeting this morning." So that's what this was about. The doors opened. He stepped out with his entourage. I stayed behind, pressing the button for the 19th floor, my floor, the one with the copy machine hum and the stale scent of neglect. Before the doors shut, I heard him say it. Not to me, of course. That would have required the guts to look me in the eye. She's a dinosaur, kind but still extinct. The elevator sealed the words in with me like a tomb. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I'd been called worse. But something shifted, not in anger, in resolve. I arrived at my desk, if you could call the metal folding table beside the printer a desk, and opened my personal laptop. Not the company-issued one. That one had been wiped clean when they restructured me into obsolescence from a private folder marked Legacy Deals. I pulled up an old merger contract, one that bore eerie resemblance to the whispers I'd been hearing about our latest acquisition. That clause, I knew it buried in legalese, but dangerous, like a landmine wrapped in velvet. I printed it, highlighted it, sat with it. By noon, I had a sticky note from HR asking if I'd be attending the holiday potluck next week. No mention of the M&A. No memo about the meeting, just the potluck. I tossed the note at lunch. I walked the long hallway back to the main floor, past the glass walls of the strategy suite where Chase now reigned. He saw me. He looked away. Funny, I used to be the one in that chair. Downstairs, Marco handed me a second cup. "Rough morning," I offered a weary smile. "Let's just say I've been made extinct." Marco raised an eyebrow. "Extinct people don't show up at 7:45 every morning, Ms. Torrance." That stayed with me longer than I expected. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing every merger clause I had ever helped write, revisiting deals that had turned near disaster into quiet success. Each one had its own history, its own scars. They weren't just numbers on paper. They were lessons in arrogance, caution, trust, and timing, and Chase had none of those lessons under his belt. At 3:17 p.m., I opened a drawer and pulled out an old leather notebook. It was one of the few things I salvaged when they cleared out my old office. Inside were notes I'd taken from a merger in 2003, handwritten messy but brilliant. I found the clause again, the one Chase's team had overlooked or dismissed, or maybe never even noticed. That clause was a poison pill. It looked harmless, just a line about post-acquisition liabilities shifting under shared governance. But I'd seen it detonate a startup's future before, and I had been the one to negotiate our way out. I closed the notebook slowly, exhaled and stared at the windowless wall in front of me. Chase didn't know this yet, but he was walking the company toward a trap. The question wasn't whether I could stop it. The question was, would they let me? And just like that, the idea formed. I didn't need permission to speak. I just needed the right moment, not to scream, not to prove them wrong out of spite, but to protect what I had helped build, even if they had already replaced my name on the door. The merger meeting started at 9. My invitation never came. 9 o'clock sharp, and I sat at my desk staring at the little blinking light on my outdated office phone. No call, no calendar invite, no email. They had always started merger meetings with me at the table. For 30 years, I had led them. Now I watched the clock, waiting for an invitation that never came. Instead, I heard heels clicking down the hallway. Callie Fenner, Chase's assistant, walked briskly past my door, eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't glance in, didn't pause, just vanished into the executive suite like I didn't exist. I got up slowly and walked toward the glass conference room on the 24th floor. I took the long route through the common area, past the kitchenette, where the interns nervously whispered about the deal. I didn't stop. I didn't need to hear their theories. I knew the stakes better than anyone. When I reached the hall outside the boardroom, I stopped just before the glass. From my angle, I could see everyone seated inside. The long mahogany table gleamed under the lights, polished and imposing. At the far end sat Chase, sharp suit arms folded. Next to him, Dorian Price, the legal counsel, held a thick binder in his lap. Callie sat beside the screen, ready to take notes. There were 15 chairs around that table, only 14 were filled. I smiled, but it wasn't from amusement. There it was, my chair, empty, untouched, as if even the furniture remembered me. They hadn't given my seat to anyone else. They'd just erased the name. I leaned against the glass wall, pretending to check a document on my phone while I listened. The glass was soundproofed, but I could read the body language. Chase was speaking fast, gesturing to slides. Dorian looked concerned. He tapped the page in his binder, shaking his head. Chase waved it off. Classic move. Talk faster than the lawyer can object. I'd seen it before. I moved to the side, just enough to catch Callie, shifting uneasily. She scribbled something, then looked toward the door. Our eyes met. For a second, just 1 second, she looked like she might come out. But then she looked down again, trapped between her boss and her conscience. I didn't blame her. Back at my desk, I opened the document I'd printed yesterday. Clause 47, buried deep in the liability section. I knew what it meant. I knew where it led. In 2003, it had nearly taken down one of our targets when post-acquisition lawsuits surfaced. Only my intervention had saved the deal in the company, but that wasn't written in the internal memos. History rarely records the hands that stop disasters. I typed up a short memo outlining the risks, in clear, unemotional terms. I wasn't trying to grandstand. I just wanted the company to see what it was missing. I emailed it to Dorian, CCing Chase and Callie. No. Subject line, just the clause reference. Minutes passed. Then a ping. From Callie, subject re-clause. 4-7. Are you available? I replied immediately. Anytime. 10 minutes later, Callie arrived at my door. She stepped in cautiously like someone entering a church. They weren't sure they believed in anymore. You really think this clause is dangerous? She asked. I know it is. She hesitated. Why didn't anyone mention it before? Because they don't remember the last time it nearly sank us. She sat down across from me. No fanfare, just a quiet understanding. Can I see the old file? She asked. I passed her the folder. My notes, my highlights, the original legal letter from the 2003 deal. She read in silence for a long time. When she looked up, her face had changed. You saved the company once, she said quietly. They forgot, I replied. Or maybe they just never knew. She stood. I'll make sure Dorian sees this. He respects the past more than Chase does. I nodded. That's all I ask. As she left, she paused at the door. By the way, that empty chair. They kept it open just in case you showed. I almost laughed. Tell Chase I'm not extinct yet. She smiled. I don't think he's ready to hear that. The rest of the day unfolded like a quiet storm, building strength. I kept my head down, sorting through archived documents, old contracts, case law precedents, anything that could substantiate what I already knew in my gut. Clause at 4.7 wasn't just dangerous, it was potentially catastrophic, and no one in that sleek glass room seemed to grasp the magnitude of it. Around 2 in the afternoon, I went for a walk down to the library floor. The physical records hadn't been used in years, replaced by cloud servers and high-speed searches, but I remembered where the print copies were kept, back when we actually read through them line by line, not skimmed for buzzwords. I found the file. A thick blue binder labeled Stratus Corp. 2003, M&A Legal inside were red-lined drafts notes in my handwriting and a transcript of a midnight call with opposing counsel. It had been a brutal deal. I had aged 5 years in 5 weeks, but I'd kept this company afloat. Walking back through the halls, I passed by the executive kitchen. Laughter. I paused. Chase stood by the espresso machine, regaling his audience with some story about his weekend ski trip. I caught a snippet, Elaine, he said, chuckling. She means well. She's like a safety net. You hope she's there, but you never actually expect to fall. The group laughed. I kept walking. At my desk, I stared at my computer screen for a full minute. Then I opened a blank document I began to write. Not just about Clause 4.7, but the whole strategy, what I saw coming, what they missed, what needed to be done. I didn't raise my voice. I raised facts, patterns, timelines, proof. By 4:30, I had 7 pages. I printed 2 copies, one for Dorian, one for myself. Then I slid it into a plain envelope and marked it, confidential, legal strategy, Torrance review, no fanfare, no demand for credit, just truth. Before I left for the evening, I passed Callie in the hallway. She looked at the envelope in my hand. You're really doing this? I met her eyes. Not for me, for the company. She nodded slowly. They'll remember this. I don't need them to remember me, I said. I need them to remember what matters. And with that, I left. Behind me, the boardroom light still glowed, but this time I didn't feel shut out, I felt ready. They called it Friendsgiving, but I was the only one not invited. The scent of cinnamon and clove drifted through the hallways by mid-morning. Someone had brought a pumpkin pie. Another cubicle had a slow cooker plugged in, bubbling with spiced cider. A hand-drawn sign taped to the break room door read, Friendsgiving, 12 p.m. Come hungry, bring thanks. It might as well have read, unless your name is Elaine Torrance. No one said I couldn't come, but no one asked me to either. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, Ravenwell had adopted a kind of false cheer. Chase was big on team culture and shared spirit, especially when it involved hashtags and Instagrammable office decor. He encouraged the junior staff to host Friendsgiving as a bonding event. I remembered organizing the first one 20 years ago, when we used to just call it lunch with leftovers. Back then I carved the turkey myself. This time they forgot to send me the calendar invite. At 11:52, I stood by the copier and watched the room across the hall fill up. Fold-out tables groaned under trays of stuffing, cranberry sauce, and too many pies. People smiled, clinked plastic cups, took selfies. I recognized every face. None of them turned toward mine. I returned to my desk with a mug of black tea, No one noticed I was gone. No one noticed I hadn't arrived until Callie. She appeared around 12:15, carrying a plate covered in foil. "You weren't there," she said softly. I gestured to the wall of my office. "Hard to hear a party when you're extinct." Callie winced. That was unfair. What Chase said, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She already knew. She set the plate down. "I saved you a slice of the apple crumble. It's the one thing nobody overcooked." "Thanks," I said, meaning it. She hesitated by the doorway. "Elaine, do you still have that merger file, the one from 2003? I raised an eyebrow. "Yes. Why?" "Because Dorian flagged clause 4.7. This morning," she said. "He's nervous. Chase brushed him off, but I remembered what you said. I think it matters." I leaned back slowly. "It matters more than he knows." "Would you talk me through it?" she asked. I pulled the file from my drawer again and motioned to the empty chair across from me. "Close the door." For the next 40 minutes, I walked her through the bones of the deal from 2 decades ago. The acquisition, the hidden clause, the lawsuits, the near collapse, the recovery. My voice stayed calm, but inside, something buzzed. Recognition, maybe purpose. Callie listened intently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, like her life depended on it. When we finished, she looked up. "This isn't just a mistake, it's a liability." "Yes, and you were the one who prevented it before I was." "Does Chase know that?" "He doesn't care." She looked troubled. "That's a problem." Outside the break room, someone laughed too loudly. I glanced through the glass and saw Chase pretending to carve a turkey breast with a plastic knife. Everyone clapped. Callie followed my gaze. "He thinks it's all under control," I nodded, "until it isn't." Silence stretched between us, then Callie leaned forward. "What do you want, Elaine?" It was a strange question, one I hadn't asked myself in a long time. Not really. I didn't answer right away. Instead I said, "I want Ravenwell to survive. Even if it forgets who helped it get here." She nodded slowly, then stood. "I'll talk to Dorian. He trusts evidence." I handed her a folder. "This is everything. Notes, letters, legal review. He'll understand." She took it with both hands, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're not extinct to me." I smiled, a small thing. One person remembering is enough. After Callie left, I sat back in my chair and looked down at the plate she brought. The crumble had cooled, the sugary topping beginning to harden. Still, I took a bite. It tasted like something from another era, sweet, sincere, unpolished, like the kind of dessert someone's grandmother might make, not a corporate potluck with catered trays and hashtags. The taste pulled something loose inside me. A memory, friends, giving years ago, when we crammed 12 people into my old office and passed around handwritten notes of thanks. One intern had written, "I'm thankful Elaine made me feel like I belong." That intern had gone on to become a senior VP. And now, probably one of the people laughing in the other room. It wasn't bitterness, not exactly. It was erosion, the slow, invisible kind, the kind you don't notice until the floor gives out. At 2:40, I took the long hallway to legal. Dorian wasn't at his desk, but his door was cracked. I slipped the folder inside, right on top of a stack of contracts. No signature, no initials. Just my handwriting on the front page, 2003 precedent, clause 4.7, impact. Then I walked back to my desk and opened my inbox. Nothing from Chase. Nothing from HR. One automated birthday reminder for a manager I'd never met. I closed my laptop and looked at the quiet hallway. Even forgotten people have shadows, and mine was starting to stretch. I stood by the window at the end of the corridor, the one place on the floor that still caught a sliver of sunlight. The city moved below me, all motion and noise, unaware of the quiet wars waged inside buildings like this one. Someone called my name behind me. I turned. It was Lewis Carrick. The last person I expected. He smiled warmly. "Didn't mean to sneak up. I was just walking, thinking." I nodded. Me too. He looked toward the break room, then back at me. You know, Elaine, I've seen more strategy in how you handled this morning than I've seen from that boardroom in weeks. I blinked. You were watching. I always watch, especially when people forget who kept the lights on during the dark days. I didn't know what to say. Louis put a hand on my shoulder, brief but firm. Keep doing what you're doing. The right people notice. Eventually. He left without another word. I stood there a while longer, letting his words settle. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be erased. I felt like I was sharpening. I wasn't supposed to be in that room, but when the panic started, they called my name. I had spent the morning trying to stay out of the way. I knew the meeting was scheduled for 10. I knew the legal team was gathering upstairs to finalize the merger. I also knew I wasn't on the guest list. I told myself I didn't care. I lied. My phone buzzed at 10:43. One line from Callie. It's happening. Dorian needs you. I didn't run, but my heels tapped faster than usual down the hallway. I took the service elevator. Fewer eyes, less spectacle. My folder was already under my arm, the one labeled Clause 4-7, Precedent and Risk. When the doors opened to the 24th floor, I stepped into a hallway drenched in tension. The glass conference room, usually filled with self-assured voices and clinks of confidence, was silent. No chatter, no laughter. Just the kind of quiet you hear right before something breaks. I pushed open the door without knocking. Everyone turned. Chase looked up, eyebrows raised. Elaine. I looked at Dorian first. His face was pale, fingers gripping a red-lined contract. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just relieved I asked her to come, he said. Chase leaned back in his chair, arms folded. This is an internal meeting. This is a legal crisis, Dorian replied, tapping the page. We missed it, she didn't. I walked to the far end of the table, the end I used to sit at, and placed my folder in front of Chase. Page 72, I said calmly. Post-acquisition liabilities. Clause 4-7. Chase didn't move. Dorian opened the folder, flipping through quickly. This clause shifts all legacy liability onto Ravenwell without trigger conditions. If we sign as is, we inherit every pending issue from Voltix Technologies, including the one they've buried in arbitration. A murmur rolled across the room. Callie looked at me with wide eyes, then nodded. Voltix has a dormant class action pending in Nevada. Product defect. I flagged it in 2003 when we considered acquiring them. They shelved the case but never resolved it. If we finalize this deal, we take on full responsibility, with no back door. Chase looked stunned. That's impossible. Their reports didn't show that, they wouldn't, I said, because they're banking on you not remembering history. They worked hard to erase. I pulled out a second file, older, tattered at the corners. Here's the same clause. Different name, same trap. We saw it 20 years ago. We nearly lost everything, and we only survived because I fought to renegotiate, under threat of withdrawal. Chase sat back slowly, color draining from his face. I didn't include you on this team for a reason, he said, voice quieter. I know, I replied. You thought I was irrelevant. Louis Carrick stood from his seat at the side of the room. I hadn't seen him enter. She wasn't irrelevant in 2003, he said, and she's not irrelevant now. The room fell into silence. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared their throat. Dorian looked to Chase. We need to pause this deal immediately. Chase didn't speak. He didn't need to. I could already feel the shift in the room. They were no longer looking to him. They were looking to me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply remained standing, the only person in the room who wasn't sitting because I hadn't been offered a seat. So instead, I held the floor. You can still move forward, I said, but only if you renegotiate the liability structure now, before signatures are exchanged, before exposure begins. Chase shifted in his chair. His jaw worked back and forth like he wanted to fight, but had no weapon left. This is an overreaction, he muttered. No, Dorian replied firmly. This is a lifeline. Chase didn't argue again. I glanced at Callie. She was watching me now with something new in her eyes. Respect, maybe, or understanding. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that she saw what Chase hadn't the benefit of long memory. Louis cleared his throat. Elaine, would you be willing to draft the revised language? If we're halting things, I'd like someone with historic vision doing the rewrite. I hesitated only for a second. Of course, for the first time in months, the air in my lungs felt full. I took a seat at the table. My seat. Chase stood and stepped out of the room without a word. Dorian passed me a notepad. Take your time, but we need it by end of day. I nodded. The others began to gather their things, murmuring among themselves. Some avoided my eyes. Some gave me cautious smiles. No one dared challenge me. When the room was nearly empty, Callie lingered. You were incredible, she whispered. I glanced up from the notepad. I was necessary. Her smile widened. Later that afternoon, I sat in my tiny office beside the printer, drafting the revised clause on the very machine they once used to print my retirement packet. Funny how tables turn. Funny how extinction has a way of reversing itself when fossils remind you they were once giants. At 4:37 p.m., I emailed the updated clause to Dorian CC'd. Louis left Chase out. My hands trembled as I clicked send, not from fear, but from release. I was never supposed to be in that room, but they called my name, and this time they listened. I watched Chase's face fall as the room turned its chairs toward me. It wasn't a moment of triumph, not in the way people imagine. No one stood and clapped. There was no cinematic score playing in the background, but something shifted, something deep and permanent. The air had changed. I sat at the end of the long table in the strategy room. My notepad lay in front of me, filled with notes, clauses, revisions, timestamps. Dorian leaned in on one side, Louis on the other. The rest of the room sat slightly straighter than usual, alert, attentive, but unusually quiet. Chase had returned, but his energy was different now. He was no longer the commanding presence. He looked smaller, unsure of where to direct his voice. When he did speak, his words landed like pebbles, not thunder. I underestimated you, Elaine, he said at last. I looked up. Yes, you did. He nodded as if he expected no consolation, and he was right not to. I let momentum carry this deal too fast. I didn't dig deep enough, he added, avoiding eye contact. That clause would have gutted us, I replied. Not just financially, legally, culturally, we would have lost more than money. Louis cleared his throat. Well, thank God someone remembered who we were before we tried to become something we're not. The room chuckled lightly, mostly from the older members of the board. Chase glanced at him, then back at me. So, what do we do now? You revise, you negotiate, and you wait until it's right, I said, not just until it's fast. He took a deep breath. Would you be willing to advise the team moving forward, at least through the next quarter? All eyes turned to me again. I smiled, but not out of spite, out of something steadier clarity. I'm not looking to reclaim a title, I said, but I will not stay invisible while the company needs memory, Dorian chimed in. I suggest we formalize her role. Senior Strategic Council report, directly to the board. Louis nodded, motion supported, one by one hands raised. Quiet, deliberate, even. Chase raised his. The vote was unanimous. No applause, just acknowledgement. That afternoon I returned to my office. Yes, still beside the printer, and found a note on my desk. From Callie, you didn't just save the merger, you saved our culture. I sat down slowly, not in triumph, but in peace. I didn't need the corner office again. What I needed was already returned, my voice. As I sat there with the note in hand, I thought about all the times I had been talked over, overlooked, or dressed up in praise, only to be boxed away like an old trophy no longer on display. And yet in that same company, in that same building, my name now sat on the top of a legal document, one that would steer the future around 3 p.m. I received a calendar notification. Strategic Council Working Session, Conf Room B. This time, my name wasn't CC'd as an afterthought. It was the first one listed. Callie met me outside the room, tablet in hand, already running on adrenaline. Dorian wants to go over the revised timeline and prep materials for the Voltix call. He also said you'll lead. She smirked his word. Not mine. Inside the room was already set. Not the boardroom, but something more functional, whiteboard, legal pads, pitchers of water, the sort of space where real work happens. For 2 hours, I laid out a roadmap, how to address Clause 4.7, how to renegotiate the structure, how to build a fallback in case Voltix walked. Callie took notes furiously. Dorian nodded, often. The analyst who once doubted me leaned forward as I spoke. They weren't just listening, they were learning. By 5, the session was over. As I packed my things, Chase stepped in. He looked tired, not defeated, just hollowed out a little, like the space where his certainty once lived had been cleared. "I'll be honest," he said quietly. "I thought you'd fight to replace me." I shook my head. That would be a distraction. What matters now is getting this right. He looked down, then back up. "You're not what I expected." "No one ever is," I said. There was a long pause. "I've got some work to do," he added. "On myself." "Good," I said. "That's where all real turnarounds begin." Back at my desk, yes, still by the printer, I found another note, this one from Louis Elaine. "A company forgets its builders at its peril. Glad you reminded us. L.C." I tucked the note into my old leather folder, the same one that once saved a deal in 2003. Now it held something new, a blueprint for a better future. Outside the window at the end of the corridor, snow had started to fall. The first light dusting of the season. It coated the city with a softness that belied its usual edge, and inside Ravenwell, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. I felt like I was walking on solid ground again. As I turned off the lights and gathered my coat, a thought crossed my mind, not of legacy or recognition, but of legacy in the quietest sense. Not the name on the door, but the blueprint on the table. Not the roar of applause, but the room that turned its chairs. Not power, but respect. And in this place, after all these years, that was everything. The office with the window view wasn't mine anymore, but that morning I didn't mind. The sun hit the top of the building just right. A soft golden light filtered through the corridor windows, reflecting off the glass surfaces with a warmth that felt almost deliberate. It was earlier than usual, but I liked it that way. I passed the old corner office on my way in. The one with the view, someone else had taken it over. A marketing executive, I think. Her name was already on the frosted glass in gold lettering. I didn't feel a sting when I saw it. Not anymore, because today I wasn't walking into obscurity. Today I had a seat at the table. By invitation, my new role came with no title on the door, no secretary, no leather-bound stationery, but it came with something more valuable. Relevance. I was no longer tolerated. I was consulted. As I entered my modest office, the one next to the printer, that now had a second chair, and a freshly painted nameplate that simply read eTorrents, Strategic Counsel. I found Callie already waiting. She handed me a folder and a smile. "We've got a Voltix update. They're asking for a renegotiation call this Friday," Dorian said. "You should lead." I took the folder. "Of course," and she added with a mischievous grin, "the board has asked you to give the quarterly strategy update next week. Apparently, they think you're very non-extinct." I chuckled, shaking my head. Did they actually use that word? Callie just winked. She stayed as I reviewed the materials. I noticed something in her demeanor, a calm confidence I hadn't seen before. She was growing into her role, and I was proud of her. Proud that she'd chosen to listen when others didn't. Proud that she'd seen through noise and into substance. Around mid-morning, we took a break. I walked down the hallway to the east wing, the one with the big windows overlooking the city skyline. It had been months since I stopped here, and yet standing before it now, I felt the same as I did decades ago. Hungry, determined, and quietly full of purpose. A shadow joined mine. "Beautiful view," Louis said, handing me a coffee. "I used to think it mattered more than it does," I replied. He nodded. "It's not about the window. It's about what you do once you're inside." We stood in silence, watching the traffic far below. You know, he said after a while, we're thinking of forming a mentorship council, pairing seasoned executives with rising ones, quiet behind the scenes. Would you consider leading it? I didn't even pause. Yes, I would. He smiled. Thought you might. Back in my office, I spent the afternoon working through documentation, but it felt different now. Every note, every email, every revision I suggested held weight, not because of force, because of earned trust. Near the end of the day, Callie returned with an envelope. From Chase, she said, handwritten. I raised an eyebrow. Inside was a short note. Elaine, I was wrong. Thank you for reminding me what real leadership looks like, Chase. No excuses, no corporate polish, just words, real ones. I folded the note and placed it into the same leather folder that had saved us in 2003. That folder now contained more than memos. It held decades of decisions, failures, recoveries, and hard-won wisdom. As the sun began to set, I returned to the window at the end of the hallway. One more time. I watched the city glow in amber light. The world kept moving faster than ever, but for once it felt like I wasn't being left behind. I had nothing to prove anymore, but I still had plenty to give. I lingered by that window longer than I meant to, listening to the quiet hum of the office behind me. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. Phones rang. A courier cart rolled by. Life kept going, but I was no longer watching from the sidelines. I was part of it again. As I made my way back to my desk, I passed by a group of junior associates standing near the elevator. Talking shop, one of them stopped me. A young man I barely recognized, probably 2 years out of school. Ms. Torrance, he said. I just wanted to say I read your notes on the merger. Brilliant stuff. I smiled. Thank you. Keep reading everything, especially the parts people skip. He nodded, beaming, then hurried to catch his elevator. In my office, I sat down with a fresh cup of tea and took a deep breath. Across from me, Callie had scribbled a quote on the whiteboard. Experience isn't outdated, it's infrastructure. I stared at the words. Not bad for someone who used to doubt herself. She popped her head in a minute later. I thought you'd erase it, not a chance, I said. That evening, when the office emptied out, I stood once more by the window. The skyline blinked with city lights, a quiet orchestra of glass and steel and human ambition. And I thought not of titles or promotions or recognition, but of legacy. Real legacy, not the plaques, not the parties, but the moments when a company changes direction because one person stood their ground. The shift in a culture, when a voice once silenced becomes the one they now wait for. I gathered my things, turned off the lights, and closed the door behind me. No one called me a dinosaur anymore, but even if they did, I'd smile, because I knew now. The ones they call extinct are often the ones still holding the map. Sometimes experience doesn't shout. It waits, it watches, and when the moment comes, it speaks with a calm that only time can teach. We live in a world obsessed with speed, youth, and disruption, but true wisdom doesn't age out. It holds the blueprint of resilience. So, the next time you're tempted to dismiss someone because they seem outdated, remember this. The ones you call dinosaurs may be the only ones who know how to survive the asteroid, and in the end, it's not titles that matter, but the quiet leadership that keeps the company standing.